The airport was buzzing. People rushed past gates, announcements echoed through the speakers, and bags rolled loudly on shiny floors. But none of that noise could hide the sound of one small piece of paper being torn in half. Right? A flight attendant, tall with a sharp blue uniform, looked down at the boy with cold eyes. "You don't belong in first class," she said, crumpling the torn ticket in her fist. "Nice try." The boy, no older than 10, stood frozen. He wore a neat button-up shirt, jeans, and a backpack with a small keychain that looked like a tiny airplane. His name was Jaden, and he had done everything right. Checked in early, gone through security, and held a valid first-class boarding pass in his hand. But now, it was gone. People nearby paused to watch. Some whispered, some looked away. A few pulled out phones. Jaden's lips parted, but no words came out. His heart pounded in his chest. He looked down at where his ticket had been. His hands were still out, open, like maybe if he stayed still enough, time would rewind. "You need to step aside," the flight attendant added firmly, her voice louder now. "This line is for real passengers." A man a few rows behind in line cleared his throat. "That was a real ticket." She shot him a glare. "Mind your business." Jaden's cheeks burned. His eyes stung, but he didn't cry. Not here. Not now. He reached into his bag with shaking fingers. That's when another voice cut through the air like a blade. "Excuse me." The crowd turned. A man in a black suit with silver cufflinks stepped forward. He walked with calm, but you could feel the power in each step. People moved out of his way without being asked. His voice was low, but somehow louder than the chaos around him. "I believe that boy is my son," he said. The flight attendant blinked. He presented a fake first class." "He didn't," the man said. "You just go." T tore up a valid boarding pass issued under my family's name, and you did it in front of a crowd on camera. She looked down at Jaden, then up at the man again. Her face turned pale, because suddenly she knew exactly who he was. Mr. Elijah Carter, CEO of Sky High Airlines. And she had just torn up the ticket of the owner's son. Jaden looked up at his dad, relief pouring over his face. But Mr. Carter wasn't done. He turned to the nearby security officer and said, "Escort this woman to the back office. Now." The flight attendant's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jaden's torn ticket lay on the floor. The cameras were still rolling, and everything was about to change. 2 weeks earlier. It was just a normal Saturday morning when Jaden sat at the kitchen counter, legs swinging from the stool, reading a book about airplanes. He had always loved flying, maybe because his dad owned an airline, or maybe because planes made him feel like anything was possible. His mom, Tasha, poured orange juice into a glass. "You're still excited for your trip?" Jaden grinned. "Yes, first time flying alone, and in first class." "You've earned it," his dad said, walking in with a briefcase in one hand and a phone in the other. "Straight A's, perfect attendance. I'm proud of you, son." Jaden blushed. "Thanks, Dad." They talked about the flight, what snacks he'd get, how to behave, when to text his mom. It was a big step. Elijah wanted Jaden to experience the world like anyone else. No special treatment, just freedom. But deep down, Elijah knew the world didn't always play fair. That's why he chose not to tell the staff who Jaden was. He wanted his son to feel normal. It was a lesson he hoped wouldn't backfire. Over the next few days, Jaden packed his bag, counted down the hours, and practiced walking through the airport with his mom. He loved every part of it. But in came the day of the flight. He woke up early, got dressed, and checked his ticket 3 times. "Flight 180 to Atlanta," he whispered, gripping the shiny boarding pass in his hand. At the airport, things started well. Security was smooth. The check-in agent was kind. A helper guided him to the gate, smiling the whole time. Then, the gate changed. They moved him to gate 12. That's where she was waiting, the flight attendant in blue with eyes that didn't smile. Jaden walked up, handed over his pass. She barely looked at it before shaking her head. "This must be a mistake." "It's my ticket," he said, voice soft. "This says first class," she replied, as if it were a problem. "Are you sure this is yours?" "Yes," she sighed. "Wait here." Jaden stepped aside. He didn't understand. People behind him whispered. Someone laughed. The line kept moving. The woman returned. "I've checked. You're not listed in the system." He showed her the email on his phone. "It's here, look." She frowned. "I don't have time for this." And then, Raip, she tore the ticket in half. "Step aside." Jaden's heart sank. His chest felt tight. The world spun a little. That's when the man in the suit arrived. Back in the present, the airport was completely silent. Mr. Carter bent down, picked up the pieces of the ticket, and looked at the woman. "You will answer for this." He turned to his son. "Come on, Jay, let's go home." The boy nodded and followed his father down the gate, while airport staff scrambled to calm the chaos behind them. But what Jaden didn't know was that this moment, the ripping of a ticket, would soon become national news. And not everyone was happy about it, because some people in power didn't want to talk about what really happened at Gate 12, and they would do everything they could to keep it quiet. But Jaden and his father weren't going to let that happen. Not this time. Not ever. The moment they stepped out of the gate, Elijah Carter's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, emails, calls, some from people he worked with, some from reporters, some from strangers who had already seen the video. But he ignored them, for now. His focus was on Jaden. They sat in the back seat of a black car, the city skyline rolling by outside. Jaden stared quietly out the window, watching airplanes take off from the runway in the distance. His face was calm, but his mind wasn't. "You okay?" Elijah asked softly. Jaden nodded, but his voice came out small. "Why did she do that?" Elijah sighed. "Sometimes, people look at someone and decide who they think they are. They don't ask, they just assume. And sometimes those assumptions come from a place of hate." "She thought I didn't belong," Jaden said, voice shaking a little. "You belonged," his father said firmly. "You always belonged." But Jaden didn't answer. He just looked back out the window. For the first time in his life, flying felt different. Back at home, Jaden's mom met them at the door. She hugged him tight and asked no questions. She had seen the video too. It was already all over the internet. Later that night, the family sat together in the living room. The TV was off. The lights were low. Elijah finally opened his laptop and watched the full clip, shot by a bystander, play out. It showed everything. The way Jaden was treated, the way the flight attendant ripped the ticket the moment Elijah arrived and took charge. It had gone viral in under an hour. Boy with no ticket. He owns the airline. Fast. Gate 12 incident. "What are you going to do?" Tasha asked quietly. Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked at his son. "What do you want me to do?" Jaden hesitated. "I don't know. I want it to matter." And that changed everything. The next morning, Elijah Carter called an emergency board meeting with the top executives of Sky High Airlines. He entered the boardroom dressed in sharp gray, his shoulders square and his expression unreadable. "I'm sure you've all seen the footage," he began. Nods around the table. "It was one of our employees. It happened at one of our gates. It happened to my son, but more importantly, it could have happened to anyone's child." One executive cleared his throat. "We could issue a statement, something neutral, Maybe call it a misunderstanding. Elijah shook his head slowly. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination. A few faces looked uncomfortable. Another board member leaned forward. "Sir, if you make this too public, it could hurt the airline's image." "I'm not worried about the image," Elijah replied. "I'm worried about the truth." Silence. "We will investigate this publicly. We will address it openly, and we will make real changes, not just for my son, but for every passenger who feels like they don't belong in spaces they've paid to be in." That was the beginning of the storm. In the following days, Jaden watched as the story grew. It was on the news, on blogs, on talk shows. People across the country were talking about what had happened. Some were outraged. Some tried to defend the flight attendant. Some said Elijah only cared because it was his child. But others, many others, shared their own stories. Stories of how they'd been stared at in first class, asked to prove they had a ticket, told they were in the wrong line, ignored. Jaden saw faces like his, families like his, and he realized he wasn't alone. At school, it was different too. Some kids were kind. "I saw you on TikTok," one boy whispered in awe. "Your dad's awesome." But others were mean. "Bet your dad just made it up to go viral," someone muttered in the lunch line. "Why didn't you just sit and coach like the rest of us?" another said with a sneer. Jaden didn't say anything. He just picked up his tray and walked away. He sat alone for the rest of lunch. That night, he told his dad everything. "You know," Elijah said, "when people get uncomfortable, they sometimes attack what they don't understand. But your story's not for them." "Then who's it for?" Jaden asked. "It's for the kids who come after you. So maybe one day, no one has to prove they belong in the seat they already paid for." That stuck with Jaden. Meanwhile, at the airline's head office, a deeper investigation was underway. The flight attendant, Karen Lowell, had been placed on leave. But when the airline's internal team looked deeper, they uncovered more than just one incident. There were reports, old complaints, passengers of color who had felt disrespected, notes from coworkers who had raised concerns. Nothing had ever been bad enough to take action. Until now. The HR director sat with Elijah in his office. "We missed this. We should have done something sooner." Elijah nodded. "You'll do something now." They agreed to release the findings publicly. But not everyone was happy about that. Behind closed doors, whispers had begun. A small group of investors didn't like the direction things were going. They said the airline was becoming too political. They said it was hurting their shares. And quietly, someone in that group began to plan something that would make the story disappear. Jaden was on his way to school when it happened. The car slowed at a red light. His driver looked down at the GPS. Jaden looked out the window, humming softly. That's when he saw it. A giant billboard. "Sky High CEO uses son for publicity stunt. Is this just a setup?" His face was on it. A cartoon version of him. Exaggerated. Mocked. He felt his stomach twist. When he got to school, kids were already laughing. Some pointed. Others looked confused. A few teachers said nothing and turned away. At recess, someone shoved a printed copy of the billboard into his locker. "Fake ticket boy." Jaden stared at the words, feeling like he couldn't breathe. He ran to the bathroom, locked the stall, and just sat there. That night, when Elijah saw the billboard, something in him snapped. He picked up his phone. "It's time," he said into the receiver. "Call the press. We're doing the interview." The next day, cameras lined the Carter family's living room. Bright lights, microphones, and one news anchor with a soft voice and sharp questions. Elijah sat on one side, Jaden on the other. "You ready?" Elijah asked quietly. Jaden nodded. I'm not afraid anymore. The interview aired that night, and when it ended, the world saw a different side of the story, but someone was already working behind the scenes to shut it down, to hide the truth, to make sure no more stories like Jaden's got told. And their next move would shock everyone. The interview changed everything. It aired on national television during prime time. Millions watched as Elijah Carter and his son Jaden sat side by side, telling their story not with anger, but with honesty. Jaden spoke carefully, his voice small at first but growing stronger as he shared how the flight attendant had made him feel invisible. I had my ticket. I was ready to go home, but she didn't believe I belonged there. And when she tore it up, it felt like she tore a piece of me too. The host leaned in. What would you want her to know now, Jaden? Jaden paused. That I'm not angry. I just wish she had looked at me like I mattered. When the interview ended, the internet erupted. People shared clips, articles, and comments. The tone shifted. No longer was it just a news story about a boy and a plane. It became something deeper, a conversation about dignity, perception, and respect. But while some saw a young boy standing up for himself, others saw a threat to their comfort, their position, or their power. That included the group of investors Elijah had warned about. They didn't like what the interview had done, and behind closed doors, they met. He's turning this airline into a social project, one said sharply. It's not our business. Our job is profits, not protests, said another. He needs to be reminded who really controls the board. What started as whispers quickly turned into strategy. Meanwhile, back at school, things were starting to shift for Jaden. A few classmates who had stayed silent now sat with him at lunch. One girl handed him a drawing, him in a superhero cape, flying above an airplane. You're brave, she said. My brother says you're cool. Jaden smiled for the first time in days. Still, not everyone was kind. A few students kept their distance. One boy snickered as he passed. Hope your daddy buys you a private jet next time. Jaden didn't reply. He was learning that silence could be stronger than shouting. That afternoon, a guidance counselor asked to meet with him. You've been through a lot, she said gently. Would you like to talk to someone? Jaden thought for a moment. Maybe, but not today. She nodded. When you're ready. Later that evening, Elijah received a call. It was from a senior executive at the airline. We need to talk, the man said in a hushed voice. Elijah raised an eyebrow. About what? They're planning a vote. Some of the board wants you out. Elijah froze. Out? For what? They say you're too distracted, that this whole thing with your son is putting the company at risk. Elijah's hand gripped the phone tighter. I am the company. Be careful, the voice warned. They're serious, and they've started talking to the press behind your back. Elijah leaned back in his chair. He had spent his whole life building something meant to fly people safely across the sky, something that should have represented inclusion, freedom, progress. And now, because he had stood up for his son, it was being used against him. He hung up and sat quietly, his thoughts racing. In the living room, Jaden sat cross-legged, building a model airplane. His brows furrowed in concentration, his small hands careful with every piece. Elijah watched him for a long moment. Maybe this wasn't just about a flight or a torn ticket. Maybe it was about rebuilding something stronger, from the ground up. The next day, the headlines hit. Sky High CEO faces backlash from board. Carter's campaign causing tensions inside airline giant. Should business stay out of activism? Elijah met with his lawyer, with the head of HR, with his PR team, but every answer felt like a half measure. Maybe you should lay low, one advisor said. Let this cool down. No, Elijah said. Now is when we turn the heat up. That night, he released his own statement. It wasn't polished. It wasn't filtered. It was real. It included stories from passengers, real names, real complaints, and real action steps. We are not just a company, it read. We are a reflection of the people who fly with us. We will be better, not later, now. It went viral again. And just when it looked like things might settle, Elijah received another message. A short video, grainy, unedited, sent from an anonymous email. He clicked play. It showed Karen Lowell, the flight attendant who had torn up Jaden's ticket. She was in the break room at an airport, laughing. And the look on his face when I ripped it up? Priceless, she said to someone off screen. Then she added, I knew he didn't belong there. His kind never does. The screen went dark. Elijah sat frozen. This wasn't just rudeness. It was hate. And now there was proof. Proof the world needed to see. Elijah Carter stared at the dark screen. The video still played in his mind, those hateful words spoken with such ease. Not frustration, not ignorance, but intention. His kind never does. He closed the laptop slowly, his fingers pressing into the top as if he could crush the weight of what he'd just seen. This wasn't just unprofessional behavior. This was something far worse, something that had infected too many plows, ACs for too long, hidden behind fake smiles and practiced customer service voices. This was a moment of truth. Elijah's phone buzzed in his hand. It was Jaden's mother, Elijah's ex-wife, Nicole. She had seen the video. Please tell me you're going to do something, she said without even saying hello. I am, Elijah replied. His voice was calm, but every word carried steel. You need to protect him, Nicole added, not just from her, but from everything this brings. I will. He hung up and dialed his assistant. Call an emergency board meeting, he said. Tonight. At the airline's headquarters, the boardroom lights cast long shadows across the table. 11 members sat in stiff silence, watching as Elijah stood at the head of the room with a laptop open in front of him. I didn't call this meeting to argue, he said. I called it to show you something. He pressed play. Karen Lowell's words echoed through the room. When the video ended, no one moved for several seconds. Finally, one of the older board members, a man who had once criticized Elijah for being too involved, cleared his throat. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable is mild, Elijah replied. This isn't just about one employee. This is about what we tolerate, what we excuse. Some board members shifted in their seats. One woman, younger and newer to the board, leaned forward. What do you propose? I'm starting a full internal audit of every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years. Every single one. If there's a pattern, we deal with it publicly, not in secret, not in silence. And the flight attendant? Another asked. She's suspended, effective immediately, Elijah said. But the investigation won't stop there. A few faces around the table looked uneasy. Elijah knew why. They were worried about how this would affect the company's stock, its media coverage, its profit margins. But Elijah didn't care. His son mattered more. Later that night, as he walked through the front door of his home, he found Jaden sitting on the couch, knees tucked to his chest, watching cartoons with the volume turned low. Hey, Elijah said softly. Jaden looked up, his face unreadable. Did you see the video? He asked. Elijah sat down beside him. Yes, I did. There was a long pause. Are people going to hate me now? Jaden asked quietly. No, son, Elijah said, wrapping an arm around him. People are going to see the truth, and some might not like it because the truth is hard for them. But that doesn't make it wrong. Jaden nodded, but the weight of everything still pressed on his small shoulders. Am I going to have to fly again? Eventually, yes, Elijah said. But when you do, things will be better because of what you stood up to. The next morning, the video was leaked. No one knew who released it, but it spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded. Racist rant caught on tape. Airline employee suspended after video surfaces. CEO's son targeted by discrimination. Industry shaken. Public opinion shifted again, more swiftly than before. There were protests outside airports. Some passengers shared their own stories online. A popular travel blogger wrote, "If this happens to the CEO's son, imagine what happens to the rest of us." Karen Lowell, the flight attendant, posted a public apology, but it felt hollow, rushed, likely prepared by a lawyer. Jaden read it quietly and then closed the article without a word. Meanwhile, inside the airline, things moved fast. Training programs were reviewed, leadership reshuffled. Elijah introduced a new executive position, Chief of Equity and Ethics. But not everyone was happy. One board member, the same man who had questioned Elijah's focus, sent a private message to several investors. "He's going too far. This isn't a company, it's becoming a cause." A reply came almost immediately. Time to remind him who really holds the keys. 2 weeks later, Elijah was walking through the terminal of JFK Airport when he noticed something odd. A small group of people in suits stood near the lounge entrance. They were whispering, glancing at their watches, holding papers. He approached. "Is there something going on?" The lead man, tall and cold-faced, looked up. "Elijah Carter?" "Yes." "I'm afraid we need to speak with you. In private." They handed him a letter. It was stamped with the airline's logo. As Elijah unfolded it, his heart beat slowly, heavily. His eyes scanned the words. Then he stopped. It was a formal request for him to step down, signed by 5 board members, backed by several major investors. The reason? Loss of focus, disruption to brand image, and placing personal matters above corporate stability. He lowered the paper. So this was it. The moment they thought they could silence him. But Elijah Carter had built this airline. He wasn't walking away quietly. Not now. Not ever. Elijah Carter stood silently in the terminal, the formal letter still in his hands. Around him, the world buzzed with airport noise, announcements overhead, luggage wheels rolling, the hum of travelers. But in his ears, there was only stillness. Step down. 3 simple words written on expensive paper. He folded the letter, placed it in his coat pocket, and looked straight at the man who handed it to him. "No," he said. The man blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not stepping down, not today, not ever. You don't get to push me out for doing what's right." The group of suited men exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for resistance. "You don't have the votes," the man said finally. "The shareholders are watching. You're destabilizing the brand." "I am the brand," Elijah said, voice rising. "I built this company from the ground up. I took the risks. I made the calls. And now, because my son faced the truth you've all ignored, you want to act like I'm the problem." "Mr. Carter, you can file your petition," Elijah said. "But I'll call a press conference before the ink dries. And if you think the public supported this company when it was just a headline, wait until they hear you tried to fire a black CEO for protecting his black son." The lead man hesitated. "You're bluffing." Elijah took out his phone and dialed his head of communications. "Prepare the press," he said. "We're going live in 2 hours." Then he walked away without another word. Back at home, Jaden was sitting at the kitchen table working on his homework when Nicole walked in holding her phone. You need to see this, she said. She placed the phone in front of him. On the screen was a news article. CEO Elijah Carter faces ouster bid from investors. Flight scandal. Sparks boardroom battle. Jaden stared at it, his pencil slipping from his fingers. They're trying to get rid of Dad? Nicole nodded. But your father's not backing down. Jaden swallowed hard. Is this my fault? She sat beside him and took his hand. Never say that again. None of this is your fault. Your dad is standing up because it's the right thing to do, not just for you, but for everyone like you. But I didn't ask for all this, he whispered. I know, she said gently. Sometimes we don't. But when the world pushes, you get to choose whether you stay down or push back. 2 hours later, Elijah stood before a row of cameras. The press conference was broadcast live on television and across every social media platform. People tuned in across the country, some out of curiosity, others in solidarity, and some in outrage. My name is Elijah Carter, he began. I am the founder and CEO of Sky High Airlines, and I'm also a father. He paused. 2 weeks ago, my son Jaden, 10 years old, had his first solo flight. He was traveling home after visiting his grandparents. He had a first class ticket like any other passenger. He inhaled deeply, but he was stopped. He was questioned, and his ticket was torn in front of his face, not because he did anything wrong, but because of what he looked like. And today, because I dared to defend him, certain members of this company want me removed. Murmurs rippled through the room. I will not be silent. I will not step down. I will not let this company, my company, become a safe space for discrimination in suits and boardrooms. He looked directly into the cameras. We are better than this. We must be better than this. The crowd erupted in applause. But outside the spotlight, the battle was just beginning. The next morning, social media was split. Some hailed Elijah as a hero. Others accused him of using his son's pain to push a personal agenda. TV debates exploded across networks. Hashtags trended. Stand with Elijah. Too woke to too fly. Justice for Jaden. Jaden watched it all from the edge of his bed. He didn't understand every word or every opinion, but he understood one thing clearly now. This was much bigger than him. Inside the airline, tensions grew. Employees were choosing sides. Some quietly sent Elijah messages of support. Others aligned with the board, fearing change, fearing public pressure, fearing for their jobs. One whistleblower came forward with emails, internal memos showing that several passengers had complained about Karen Lowell before. Complaints had been ignored. Elijah's legal team gathered every document. This is what they were trying to hide, his lawyer said. But just as Elijah prepared to take the fight to court, a bombshell dropped. A second video leaked. This one was older. It showed a different employee, a gate agent, refusing to allow a family to board early, despite their having priority passes. The family was black. When questioned, the agent had muttered something and or her breath. Too many of them these days. First class used to mean something. The date stamp on the footage was from over a year ago, and the agent was still employed. This time, the public outrage was louder. Sponsors threatened to pull funding. Partner airlines paused cooperation. And behind closed doors, the board panicked. A secret vote was held that night. Elijah wasn't invited, but he got wind of it. He stood outside the boardroom, waiting. When the door opened, silence greeted him. One board member, the youngest, who had always quietly supported him, walked over. You survived, she said. Barely? She nodded. They don't have enough votes to oust you, but they'll keep trying, and they're getting desperate. Elijah clenched his jaw. Let them. Then she added, But there's something else. What? She looked over her shoulder, then back at him. They're not going to attack you next. Elijah frowned. Then who? Your son. Elijah's world slowed for a second. They're going after my son? He asked, barely above a whisper. The young board member nodded. Not publicly, not yet. But I overheard two of them speaking after the vote. They want to dig up something, anything, to paint Jaden in a bad light, to make this look like a father abusing power to protect a troubled kid. Elijah's fist clenched. He's 10. He still sleeps with a nightlight. They don't care. This isn't about truth. It's about damage control. They want to turn sympathy into suspicion. He felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. How long do I have? He asked. Not long. Later that night, Elijah sat at the edge of Jaden's bed, watching his son sleep. The boy's chest rose and fell with each quiet breath. His arms were wrapped around his favorite stuffed bear, the same one he'd taken on every flight since he was faint. Elijah couldn't understand it. Why would anyone go this far? Why smear a child? But then again, he did understand. This wasn't just about Jaden. It was about power, control, a system threatened by accountability. And in their desperation to keep that system untouched, they were willing to do the unthinkable. Elijah stood, kissed Jaden's forehead, and whispered, "I've got you." Then he went to his office. By morning, headlines had changed again. New video, same story. Airline under fire as past discrimination emerges. Insiders say more racism complaints were buried by leadership. CEO's job, still uncertain amid chaos. But one smaller, dangerous article quietly made its way onto a fringe blog, Jaden Carter, Not So Innocent. It was filled with nothing but speculation, anonymous sources claiming Jaden had been disruptive during a school trip or rude to airline staff years earlier when he was barely out of kindergarten. Elijah slammed his fist against the desk. He knew this was the beginning of the smear campaign. Within hours, trolls online picked up the story. It began trending, just low enough not to hit national news, but loud enough to plant doubt. Elijah immediately called his lawyer. "We need a full takedown," he said. "Every lie, every false claim. We respond legally and publicly." "Already on it," she replied. But this was calculated. They're testing the waters. That afternoon, Elijah called a press conference, not to talk about himself or even the company, but to speak directly about Jaden. "My son is not a public figure. He is a child," he said, standing alone in front of the microphones. "And anyone targeting him for standing up against injustice should be ashamed." Then he paused. "But since you want to talk about him, let me tell you about Jaden Carter." He shared stories. Jaden helping raise money for a school field trip for another classmate. Jaden calming a crying baby on a flight. Jaden giving his seat to an elderly woman on a bus. "He's not perfect," Elijah said. "No one is. But he's kind. He's strong. And he's braver than many adults." "I know." The crowd applauded. But behind the scenes, the board fumed. Days later, Elijah walked into his office and found the youngest board member waiting. "You were right," she said. "What now?" "They've hired a private investigator. They're trying to dig into you and Jaden both. Looking for anything." Elijah sighed. "Then we give them something." She frowned. "What?" "Truth." He released internal reports, open files on complaints the airline had ignored. He gave journalists access to everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Transparency was his only defense. It was a bold move, and it worked. Public trust surged again. Major influencers, politicians, and passengers voiced support for Elijah and the changes he was making. But the airline's enemies weren't done yet. One rainy evening, as Nicole drove Jaden home from school, a black car began following them. It stayed back, but close enough to unsettle her. She turned corners. It followed. She changed streets. It stayed behind. Heart pounding, she called Elijah. "Someone's following us," she whispered. "Where are you?" he asked, standing from his desk. Nicole gave him the street. "Drive to the downtown police station. Don't stop. I'll meet you there." 15 tense minutes later, Nicole pulled into the police lot. The car didn't follow them in, but when Elijah arrived, he found Jaden shaken and silent. Nicole pulled him aside. "This isn't random." Elijah nodded. "I know. And now it's personal." The next morning, Elijah held a private security meeting. Jaden would now have a security detail. So would Nicole. Elijah wanted cameras on every property they used, every car they drove. And more than that, he wanted names. "Find out who sent that car," he ordered. It took just 24 hours. An investigator returned with a file. Inside were emails between one of the board's wealthiest backers and a private security firm, asking them to keep an eye on Elijah's family. That was all Elijah needed. He went public, and when he did, the internet erupted. "Airline war goes too far, CH. ILD followed. Family stalked. CEO strikes back with evidence. Board members facing federal scrutiny." But even as Elijah gained support, one final unexpected event pushed the entire saga into the storm. The FAA announced a formal investigation into Sky High Airlines, citing years of ignored complaints, racial bias allegations, and possible corruption inside the board. Elijah stood on the tarmac the next morning, watching planes lift into the sky and wondering if any of this would survive what was coming. His phone buzzed. It was Jaden. "Dad?" the boy said nervously. "Are we going to lose everything?" Elijah looked at the rising sun, bright and unblinking through the clouds. "No," he said softly. "We're going to build something better." But just as he hung up, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was his lawyer. "You need to come in now," she said. "They've filed the vote again. Only this time, they brought in outside investors to swing the decision. They might actually pull it off." Elijah's heart dropped. Everything they had fought for was about to be stolen. The boardroom was silent. Elijah Carter stood at the head of the long oak table, his hand resting on a printed copy of the investigator's report. Behind him, a large screen showed a timeline of every complaint, every cover-up, and every silent nod that allowed bias to go unchecked in the airline for years. "We're not here just because my son's ticket was torn up," Elijah said, his voice steady but firm. "We're here because that moment pulled back the curtain on something deeper, something many of you chose not to see." A few board members shifted in their seats. Others avoided his gaze. "We failed people," he continued. "Not just Jaden, not just black passengers, but every employee and traveler who believed this airline stood for fairness." He turned to the monitor again, revealing emails, showing the efforts to discredit his family and pressure whistleblowers into silence. One of the board members tried to speak. Elijah raised a hand. "I gave you all the chance to handle this with integrity," he said. "Instead, you chose silence. You chose image over action. That ends today." The general counsel entered the room, carrying a folder. "This is a motion signed by a majority of external stakeholders," she announced, "to remove all board members complicit in the attempted cover-up, the retaliation, and the surveillance of Mr. Carter's family." One by one, the names were read. Some of them hung their heads, others argued, but the decision had been made. Elijah didn't smile. There was no joy in it, just relief. and sorrow that it had come to this. After the room cleared, Elijah sat alone at the head of the table for a moment. He thought of Jaden, of how confused and hurt he had looked that day at the gate, of how many other children, families, and travelers had faced the same, without a CEO for a father to protect them. That was the true injustice. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the line of planes, his company, his responsibility. Then he made a decision. 2 weeks later, Elijah called a press conference, not to defend his brand, but to change it. Standing on the same runway where his father once took him to see his first plane, Elijah made an announcement. "We're launching a new department within Sky High Airlines," he said, his voice carrying in the wind. "It will be led by a team that reflects the people we serve, not just in race, but in culture, gender, and lived experience." He outlined real policy changes, equity training, bias reporting systems, and a zero-tolerance code that applied at every level, from crew to boardroom. And then, with a deep breath, he did something few CEOs ever do. He apologized. "To every passenger who ever felt unseen, mistreated, or unwelcome on one of our flights, I am sorry, and I promise, this airline will do better." The crowd went as silent at first, then applause. Not loud or explosive, but long and steady, the sound of people who had waited a long time to hear the truth. At home, Jaden sat on the floor building a model plane. Nicole was helping him line up the wings when Elijah walked in. "Hey, kid," he said softly. Jaden looked up and smiled. "Did you do it?" Elijah nodded. "We did." The boy's face lit up. "I want to make a plane one day," Jaden said. "One that lets everyone fly." "You will," Elijah said, "and no one will tear up your ticket ever again." Later that month, Elijah quietly invited the flight attendant, Mr. Kenner, to a private meeting. He wasn't required to. No cameras were rolling, no press knew. But Elijah believed in something deeper than punishment. Mr. Kenner arrived nervous, eyes low. He had been suspended pending review, and he clearly didn't expect to be treated with anything other than anger. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He just asked, "Do you understand what you did?" The man nodded slowly. "I do now. I didn't then, but I do now." "It wasn't just about the ticket," Elijah said. "It was the message you sent to my son, that he didn't belong, that his skin made him suspicious or second class." "I've replayed that day over and over," Kenner admitted. "I wish I could take it back." "You can't," Elijah said, "but you can decide what you do next." He handed him a folder. Inside was information about restorative justice programs, equity training, and an opportunity, if earned, to return to the company, but in a new role focused on rebuilding trust. Kenner looked up, shocked. "You're giving me a chance?" "I'm giving you the choice," Elijah replied. "Growth is never guaranteed, but it must be possible." Months passed. Sky High Airlines changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. Flyers noticed. Employees noticed. Jaden's story became part of a school presentation on standing up against injustice. He didn't talk about revenge or power. He talked about respect and why no one should be judged by the color of their skin. And as Elijah watched from the back of the classroom, he realized something. This wasn't just a win for their family. It was a win for truth, for dignity, for every ticket torn up that never made the news, and every voice that deserved to be heard.